Daniel Wright pushed his glasses up his nose and stared at the screen in front of him. The numbers never seemed to end. Catalog entry 4789 showed another broken piece of alien metal from the latest battle. Catalog entry 4790 was a damaged weapon that nobody could figure out how to use. Entry 4791 was just fragments of what used to be Kitharin datapad. Doc, he had been doing this job for 3 years now. Every day brought new artifacts from destroyed enemy ships. Every day he typed descriptions into the computer system aboard the research vessel Meridian. Most days he wondered if anyone even read his reports. The war had been going on for 15 long years. Daniel was only 28, but he felt much older. He had spent his entire adult life watching humanity fight against the Kitharin Empire. The aliens were stronger than humans. Their weapons were better. Their ships moved faster. Every battle report that came through the communication system told the same story. Humans were losing. Daniel was not a soldier. He had never held a weapon, except to catalog it. His job was to sit in the quiet library section of the ship and organize everything the military found. Books, artifacts, data chips, broken equipment, even pieces of alien clothing. Everything came to him eventually. The library was his world. It had tall shelves filled with information from 100 different planets. The walls were lined with screens showing data from across human space. Most of the time he was alone here. Soldiers did not care much about old books and broken artifacts. They wanted weapons that could win battles. Captain Lisa Morgan had made that very clear when she assigned him to this job. She told him to keep the artifacts organized, but not to waste time on theories or wild ideas. The military needed practical solutions, not academic research. Daniel understood, but sometimes he couldn't help wondering about the strange things that crossed his desk. Today was different, though. Among the usual collection of broken metal and burned circuits, something caught his attention. It was a small piece of stone with symbols carved into its surface. The stone was dark gray and felt warm to the touch. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen before. Daniel had cataloged thousands of Kitharin artifacts. He knew their writing system well. Their symbols were always sharp and angular, like their technology. But these symbols were different. They curved and flowed like water. Some looked almost familiar, like something he might have seen in old human history books. He took photos of the stone from every angle and ran them through the translation software. The computer found no matches in any known Kitharin database. It found no matches in human databases either. According to every system on the ship, these symbols did not exist, but they did exist. Daniel could see them. He could trace them with his finger. As he did, he noticed something strange. The symbols seemed to get warmer under his touch. It was probably just his imagination, but it felt real. The artifact had come from a destroyed Kitharin outpost near the Vega system. The report said the outpost was very old, maybe older than the current Kitharin civilization. Most of the technology there had been different from what humans usually found. The weapons were cruder. The computers were simpler. Even the architecture looked ancient. Daniel read through the battle report again. 3 of the symbols from the stone appeared in the digital scans of the outpost walls. The military scanning team had noted them, but dismissed them as decorative art. They were looking for weapons and strategic information, not ancient graffiti. Peter Collins arrived just as Daniel was finishing his initial analysis. Peter worked in the archaeology section of the ship. He was older than Daniel, maybe 40, with gray starting to show in his brown hair. Unlike most people on the ship, Peter actually enjoyed talking about old things. "Find something interesting today?" Peter asked as he looked over Daniel's shoulder at the stone. "Maybe," Daniel said. "Look at these symbols. Have you ever seen anything like them?" Peter studied the photos on the screen. His eyes widened as He recognized something. These three symbols here. He pointed to the screen. I've seen these before. Not exactly the same, but very similar. Where? In some of the oldest human archaeological sites. Cave paintings from Earth, some Sumerian. Tablets. I always thought they were just decorative elements, but seeing them here. Peter trailed off, thinking. Daniel felt his heart beat faster. What are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe these symbols are older than either of our civilizations. Much older. The two men stared at the stone in silence. Around them, the quiet hum of the ship's engines provided a constant background noise. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of soldiers training in the exercise areas. The war continued while they sat in their quiet library, looking at symbols that might be older than recorded history. Daniel carefully placed the stone in a protective case. Whatever these symbols meant, he was going to find out. For the first time in 3 years, his job felt important. For the first time since the war began, he felt like he might be able to help his people in a way that mattered. The stone seemed to pulse with warmth as he sealed the case. Daniel told himself it was just his imagination, but deep down, he knew something significant was beginning. Daniel spent the next 3 days comparing symbols. He had access to the largest collection of human historical data in known space. The Meridian's library contained scanned copies of artifacts from every major archaeological site on Earth and the colony worlds. If the symbols existed anywhere in human history, he would find them. Peter helped him search through thousands of images. They started with the most obvious connections. Ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets showed 3 symbols that matched the stone. Egyptian hieroglyphs had 2 more. But the biggest surprise came from the oldest sources. Cave paintings from France, dated to 40,000 years ago, contained 7 of the symbols. A painting showed human figures arranged in circles, their hands raised toward strange spiral patterns in the sky. The symbols appeared around the edges of the spirals, as if they were some kind of instructions or explanations. This doesn't make sense, Peter said as they stared at the screen. How can the same symbols appear in 40,000-year-old human cave? Art and on an ancient Kithaeron artifact? Daniel had been wondering the same thing. The official history said that humans and Kithaerons had never met before the war began 15 years ago. Contact between the species was supposed to be completely new, but the evidence in front of them suggested otherwise. Maybe our history is wrong, Daniel said quietly. Maybe the contact is much older than anyone realizes. They kept searching. Medieval manuscripts from Earth contained hidden symbols worked into decorative borders. Ancient Chinese texts had them carved into stone monuments. Even some Native American petroglyphs showed similar markings. The symbols appeared across cultures that had no contact with each other, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. But there was something else. The more Daniel studied the symbols, the more he began to understand their meaning. They weren't random marks or decorative art. They formed a kind of language, but not one that worked like normal writing. Instead of representing sounds or objects, the symbols seemed to represent ideas or actions. The most common symbol appeared in almost every source. It looked like 2 curved lines that almost formed a circle, with a small gap between the ends. In the cave paintings, this symbol always appeared near human figures who had their eyes closed. In the Sumerian tablets, it was associated with priests and religious ceremonies. In the Chinese texts, it appeared in sections about meditation and spiritual practices. Daniel began to call it the silent voice symbol because that phrase kept appearing in the translated texts that contained it. The ancient humans seemed to believe that certain people could speak without words, could communicate across great distances using only their thoughts. Dr. Helen Barnes was not impressed when Daniel showed her his findings. Helen was the ship's chief scientist, a practical woman who dealt in facts and measurements. She had no patience for ancient mysteries or spiritual theories. "You're seeing patterns that aren't there," she told him during their meeting in her laboratory. "Humans are good at finding connections, even when none exist. It's called apophenia." "But look at the evidence," Daniel insisted. "The same symbols appear across thousands of years of human history. And now we find them on a Kithaeron artifact. That can't be a coincidence." Helen studied the data on her own screen. She was quiet for several minutes, running calculations and cross-referencing databases. Finally, she looked up with a puzzled expression. "There is something unusual here," she admitted. "I've been studying Kithaeron neural patterns for 2 years. Their brain waves operate on very specific frequencies. According to my research, those frequencies happen to match the ones that human brains produce during deep meditation states." Daniel felt his excitement growing. "What does that mean?" "It means that if humans could somehow project their thoughts on those frequencies, Kithaeron brains might be able to receive them. But that's just theoretical. No human has ever demonstrated the ability to project thoughts across space." "What if they have?" Daniel asked. "What if that's what all these ancient texts are describing? What if some humans really could communicate using thought alone?" Helen shook her head. "Even if that were possible, which I doubt, it would be useless against Kithaeron technology. Their ships have electronic shielding. Their soldiers use cybernetic implants. Mental influence might work on a primitive brain, but not on an enhanced one." But Daniel wasn't convinced. That night, he returned to the library and continued his research. He focused on the texts that mentioned the silent voice. The more he read, the more he began to understand what the ancient humans were describing. It wasn't magic or supernatural power. It was a technique, a way of training the human mind to operate on specific frequencies. The cave paintings showed people sitting in circles, following precise breathing patterns. The Sumerian tablets described exercises for focusing consciousness. The Chinese texts outlined meditation practices that could take years to master. The ancient humans had developed a technology of consciousness. They had learned to use their minds as communication devices, projecting thoughts across vast distances. The symbols weren't just writing, they were instructions. A manual for awakening abilities that most humans had forgotten they possessed. Daniel printed out the clearest instructions he could find. The process seemed simple enough. Controlled breathing, specific body positions, focused concentration on the symbols themselves. According to the texts, a properly trained person could reach out with their mind and touch the thoughts of others, even across the space between stars. As he read by the dim light of his desk lamp, Daniel felt the stone artifact warm against his hand where he had been unconsciously touching it. The symbols seemed to glow slightly in the darkness, as if responding to his growing understanding. For the first time since the war began, Daniel felt hope. Maybe humans weren't as helpless as they seemed. Maybe they had weapons the Kithaerons didn't know about. Maybe the key to winning the war wasn't in building better ships or stronger guns, but in remembering what humans used to be capable of. Daniel knew he needed help. The ancient instructions were complex, and he had no experience with meditation or consciousness techniques. Fortunately, the Meridian had someone who did. Kevin Martinez worked as the ship's counselor. His job was helping soldiers deal with the stress of war. He had studied various meditation techniques as part of his training. When Daniel approached him with the ancient texts, Kevin was immediately interested. "These breathing patterns are similar to ones I know," Kevin said as he studied the translated instructions. "The body positions are different, but the basic principles are the same. Focus the mind, control the breath, enter a deeper state of consciousness." They decided to conduct their experiments in secret. Captain Morgan had already made it clear that she wanted practical weapons, not ancient theories. If Daniel was wrong about the symbols, he didn't want to waste official time and resources. If he was right, he wanted to understand how it worked. Before bringing it to the attention of Command. Peter helped them find a quiet place to work. Deep in the ship's lower levels was a small meditation room that Kevin sometimes used for counseling sessions. It was soundproof and private, far from the busy areas where soldiers trained and worked. Their first attempts were complete failures. Daniel tried to follow the ancient breathing patterns, while Kevin guided him through basic meditation techniques. Nothing happened except that Daniel got dizzy and developed a headache. After 2 hours, they gave up for the day. The second attempt went no better. Daniel could achieve a calm, meditative state, but he felt no connection to anything beyond himself. The symbols on the stone remained just marks on rock. Kevin suggested they might be trying too hard, pushing for results instead of letting them come naturally. On the third day, they tried a different approach. Instead of focusing on the specific instructions, Daniel simply held the stone and let his mind wander. He thought about the cave paintings, about ancient humans sitting in circles under starlit skies. He imagined what it might feel like to reach. Across vast distances with nothing but thought, something shifted. For just a moment, Daniel felt his consciousness expand beyond the walls of the meditation room. He sensed other minds nearby, the thoughts and emotions of people throughout the ship. Then the sensation vanished, and he was back to normal, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. Kevin had felt it too. There was something there, he said quietly. I don't know what, but something definitely happened. They practiced every day for a week. Each session lasted several hours, and each time Daniel got a little further. He began to sense the emotional states of people in nearby sections of the ship. He could tell when someone was angry or sad or afraid, even if they were several decks away. But it wasn't until the 7th attempt that the real breakthrough occurred. Daniel was deeper in the meditative state than he had ever been before. The symbols on the stone seemed to pulse with their own light. His breathing had fallen into the ancient pattern without conscious effort. Kevin's voice seemed to come from very far away as he provided quiet guidance. Suddenly, Daniel's awareness exploded outward. He could sense every mind on the ship. He felt the thoughts and emotions of over 3,000 people all at once. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. But there was something else. In the detention area 3 decks below, Daniel sensed minds that were different. Alien minds. The Kithaeron prisoners that the ship carried for interrogation. Their thought patterns were strange and angular, like their technology, but he could read them clearly. More than read them. He could influence them. One of the prisoners was thinking about escape plans. Daniel focused on that mind and gently suggested that escape was impossible, that cooperation would be better. He watched in amazement as the prisoner's thoughts shifted. Accepting the new idea, as if it had always been there. Another prisoner was feeling homesick for the world where he was born. Daniel planted a suggestion that the war was senseless, that both sides would be better off making peace. Again, the alien mind accepted the thought without resistance. The session ended when alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Daniel snapped back to normal consciousness as Kevin shook his shoulder. Emergency lights were flashing, and they could hear running footsteps in the corridors outside. All hands to battle stations, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. We have received a distress signal from the colony ship New Haven. Kithaeron battle fleet attacking civilian population. All ships in this sector respond immediately. Daniel and Kevin rushed to the nearest information terminal. The news was grim. New Haven carried 40,000 civilian colonists, including children and elderly people. The Kithaeron attack force consisted of 12 warships with advanced weapons and shielding. 3 human military vessels were responding, but they would arrive too, late to prevent massive casualties. The Meridian was a research ship with minimal weapons. In a direct fight, They would be destroyed in minutes. Captain Morgan was already ordering the ship to maximum speed, but they were still 6 hours away from the battle zone. Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He found Captain Morgan on the bridge and told her about the experiments with the stone. He explained about the ancient symbols, about the mental connection he had made with the Kithaeron prisoners, about the possibility of influencing enemy minds. Across vast distances, Captain Morgan listened with growing amazement and skepticism. "You're telling me you can control alien thoughts from across space?" "I don't know if I can control them," Daniel said honestly. "But I might be able to influence them. I might be able to save New Haven without firing a shot." The captain looked at the tactical displays showing the desperate situation at New Haven. 40,000 civilians were about to die, and there was nothing conventional weapons could do to stop it. She made the hardest decision of her military career. "Do it," she said. "Whatever you think you can do, try it now." The meditation room had never felt so important. Daniel sat in the center with the ancient stone in his hands, while Kevin prepared the space around him. Peter operated a communication link to the bridge so they could receive updates on the battle. Dr. Helen Barnes monitored Daniel's vital signs to make sure the mental strain didn't kill him. "New Haven is under heavy attack," Peter reported from his position at the communication console. "The Kithaeron fleet has broken through their outer defenses. They're targeting civilian areas." Daniel closed his eyes and began the breathing pattern that had become familiar over the past week. But this was different from their practice sessions. He wasn't trying to reach minds that were 3 decks away. He was attempting something that should have been impossible, projecting his consciousness across 6 light years of space to a battle zone where thousands of people were dying. The stone grew warm in his hands. The symbols seemed to burn themselves into his vision, even with his eyes closed. Daniel felt his awareness begin to expand, flowing outward from the ship like ripples in a vast pond. First, he sensed the minds aboard the Meridian. 3,000 human thoughts, most focused on the desperate situation at New Haven. Fear and helplessness dominated their emotions. They all wanted to help, but knew they were too far away to make a difference. Daniel pushed his consciousness further. Empty space stretched between him and his destination, but space wasn't really empty. Ancient texts had suggested that consciousness could travel along paths that physical matter couldn't follow. Quantum connections that linked all thinking beings across any distance. It took enormous effort, but gradually Daniel began to sense something far away. Flashes of alien thoughts. Kithaeron minds focused on battle and destruction. The attacking fleet at New Haven. "His brain activity is off the charts," Dr. Barnes reported quietly. "I've never seen patterns like this in a human mind." Daniel barely heard her. He was no longer entirely present in the meditation room. Part of his consciousness was 6 light years away, touching the minds of Kithaeron warriors as they fired on civilian targets. Through alien eyes, he saw the colony ship New Haven. It was a massive vessel designed to carry families to new worlds, not to fight wars. Its hull was torn open in several places. Escape pods were launching desperately as the ship began to break apart. The Kithaeron fleet surrounded New Haven like predators circling wounded prey. Their weapons charged for another devastating attack that would destroy what remained of the civilian ship. Daniel felt the cold satisfaction of the alien commanders as they prepared to eliminate another group of human colonists. But he also felt something else. The Kithaeron minds were surprisingly vulnerable to outside influence. Their technological implants and neural enhancements, which were supposed to make them stronger, had actually made them more susceptible to mental suggestion. The artificial components in their brains created pathways that Daniel's consciousness could follow, instead of trying to stop them directly, which their military training would resist. Daniel began planting subtle thoughts. He suggested to the fleet commander that the attack was taking too long, that other human ships might arrive soon. He made the weapons officer worry about energy levels in the ship's power systems. Most importantly, he began implanting concerns about threats to their home worlds. Through careful mental suggestion, he convinced several commanders that they had received emergency communications requiring their immediate return. The messages felt real to the alien minds because Daniel was creating them from inside their own thoughts. "Something's happening," Peter announced from the communication station. "New Haven reports that 2 Kithran ships have broken off their attack and are jumping to hyperspace." Daniel pressed harder, working through the neural networks. Of the remaining ships, he spread feelings of doubt and confusion. He made navigation officers question their coordinates. He caused weapon systems to develop mysterious malfunctions that seemed real to their operators. The effort was enormous. Daniel felt as if his consciousness was being stretched across impossible distances. Dr. Barnes kept reporting dangerous changes in his vital signs, but he couldn't stop now. Too many lives depended on his success. Through the eyes of a Kithran gunner, Daniel watched another weapons blast barely miss New Haven's main civilian section. Thousands of families were still trapped aboard that ship. Children who'd never see their new home if the attack continued. Drawing on reserves of mental strength he didn't know he possessed, Daniel reached deeper into the alien fleet's command structure. He planted the suggestion that their intelligence about New Haven had been wrong, that the ship was actually a military trap waiting to spring. He made radar operators see phantom human warships approaching from multiple directions. One by one, the Kithran vessels began withdrawing from the battle. Their commanders, convinced by thoughts that felt like their own, decided that tactical retreat was the wisest option. Within minutes, the entire alien fleet had jumped to hyperspace, leaving New Haven damaged but alive. "They're gone," Peter shouted with joy. "The entire Kithran fleet just retreated. New Haven is safe." Daniel tried to respond, but found he couldn't speak. The effort of projecting his consciousness across interstellar space had drained him completely. He collapsed forward, the ancient stone falling from numb fingers. Dr. Barnes rushed to check his condition while Kevin helped support his unconscious form. His vital signs were weak but stable. The mental strain had pushed his brain beyond normal human limits, but he was alive. "Will he be all right?" Peter asked with concern. "I think so," Dr. Barnes replied, but her voice carried uncertainty. "What he just did should have been impossible. I have no idea what the long-term effects might be." Captain Morgan arrived in the meditation room as Daniel was regaining consciousness. She looked at the young librarian with new respect and considerable worry. "You saved 40,000 people today," she told him. "But I need to know if you can do it again. High Command is going to want a full report on this. They're going to want to know if we found a new weapon that can end this war." Daniel struggled to sit up, his head pounding with exhaustion. The ancient stone lay on the floor beside him, its symbols no longer glowing. He picked it up with trembling hands and felt only cool rock. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The text suggests this ability exists in more humans than just me. But using it like this, across such distances, it nearly killed me." Captain Morgan nodded grimly. "Then we need to find others who can do what you do, and we need to find them fast. Because if word of this gets out, the Kithrans will adapt their defenses. We may only have one chance to use this advantage before we lose it forever." As medical personnel helped Daniel to the ship's hospital, he realized that his quiet life as a librarian was over. He had uncovered a weapon that could change the course of the war, but he had also opened a door that could never be closed again. Earth felt strange to Daniel after 3 years aboard the Meridian. Gravity was heavier than the ship's artificial systems. The sky was too blue and too wide after living inside metal corridors. But most unsettling was the attention he received. From the moment he stepped off the transport, General Patricia Adams met him personally at the military spaceport. She was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Her reputation preceded her. She was known as the most brilliant strategic mind in the human military. "Mr. Wright," she said as she shook his hand, "what you did at New Haven has reached the highest levels of command. We need to talk." The ride to military headquarters took them through the capital city. Daniel saw construction everywhere as humanity, rebuilt from 15 years of war. Memorial walls listed the names of soldiers who had died fighting the Kitherans. Propaganda posters urged citizens to support the war effort. The entire planet seemed focused on the conflict that had defined. A generation dotted headquarters. General Adams led Daniel to a secure conference room deep underground. The walls were lined with screens showing tactical data from across human space. Star maps marked current battle zones in red. Casualty reports scrolled past in endless streams of numbers. "Before we discuss your abilities," General Adams said, "I need to show you something that has been classified at the highest levels for 30 years. She activated a holographic display that showed archaeological sites from across human space. Ancient ruins on a dozen different worlds, all containing the same mysterious symbols that Daniel had found on the Kithaeron artifact. "We've known about these markings for decades," the general explained. "Our xenarchaeologists found them on planets that were supposed to be uninhabited before human colonization. We never understood what they meant until your report from the Meridian." Daniel studied the holographic images with growing amazement. The symbols were everywhere humans had explored, not just on Earth, but on colony worlds, abandoned space stations, even carved into asteroids in remote star systems. "How is that possible?" he asked. "These symbols predate human space travel by thousands of years." General Adams smiled grimly. "That's what we thought too. But recent research suggests a different explanation. The symbols aren't ancient alien markings. They're ancient human markings." She brought up another display showing genetic analysis data. "Our best scientists believe that humanity spread across the galaxy long before recorded history. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans possessed the mental abilities you demonstrated at New Haven. They used those abilities to travel between stars, to communicate across vast distances, to influence the minds of other species." The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. "You're saying humans were already a spacefaring civilization? More than that. We think humans were the dominant species in this part of the galaxy. The symbols you found aren't instructions for developing mental powers. They're reminders of abilities that every human once possessed." General Adams led him to another section of the facility where a team of researchers was studying volunteers. From across human space, men and women of different ages and backgrounds sat in meditation chambers similar to the one Daniel had used aboard the Meridian. "After your success at New Haven, we began testing people throughout the military," General explained. "About 1 person in 10,000 shows some level of mental ability. Most can only sense emotions at close range. A few can influence thoughts across a room. But you're the only one we've found who can project consciousness across interstellar distances." Dr. Barnes appeared from one of the research labs. She had been transferred to Earth immediately after the New Haven incident to help develop training protocols for the mental abilities. "The interesting thing," she told Daniel, "is that the ability seems to be stronger in people who have had exposure to the ancient symbols. The stone artifacts act as some kind of amplifier or focusing device." They showed Daniel a collection of similar stones that had been gathered from archaeological sites across human space. Each one contained variations of the same symbolic language. Some were larger than the one he had found, carved with more complex instructions and techniques. "We think these were left by our own ancestors," General Adams said. "A legacy from when humanity ruled the stars through mental power rather than technology." "But what happened to those abilities?" Daniel asked. "Why did humans forget how to use them?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Raymond Clark was an elderly historian who had spent his entire career studying the Kithaeron Empire. He had been brought to the facility to provide context for Daniel's discoveries. "The Kithaerons have their own ancient texts," Dr. Clark explained. "Legends about a great war thousands of years ago against a species they call the Silent Ones. According to their histories, the Silent Ones could control minds across vast distances. They nearly conquered the galaxy before mysteriously disappearing." Daniel felt pieces of an ancient puzzle falling into place. The Silent Ones were humans? "We believe so. The Kithaeron texts describe them as appearing similar to modern humans, but with far greater mental abilities. The war against them lasted for centuries and nearly destroyed Kithaeron civilization." "How did the Kithaerons win?" Dr. Clark brought up images of ancient Kithaeron ruins. "They developed technology specifically designed to block mental influence. Cybernetic implants, electronic shielding, artificial intelligence systems. Everything they created was meant to make them immune to mental control. But it had an unexpected side effect," Dr. Barnes added. "The same technology that protected them from mental influence also made them more vulnerable to it. Their cybernetic implants create neural pathways that can be accessed by someone with the right abilities." General Adams activated a tactical display showing current Kithaeron fleet positions. "Which brings us to why you're here. We need to know if your abilities can be taught to others. We need to know if this ancient human legacy can be awakened in enough people to make a difference in the war." Daniel looked around the room at the researchers, the generals, the volunteers, and the meditation chambers. All of them were looking to him for answers he wasn't sure he possessed. "The texts suggest that every human has the potential," he said slowly. "But developing the abilities takes time and training. And using them on the scale you're talking about could be dangerous." "Dangerous? How?" "The ancient warnings speak of people who pushed too far, who lost themselves in the mental networks they created. Some never returned to their own bodies. Others went insane from contact with too many alien minds." General Adams nodded seriously. "We understand the risks, but we also understand what's at stake. The war is going badly. Humanity could lose everything within the next few years. If this ancient legacy is our only hope, then we have to try to reclaim it." Daniel picked up one of the larger stone artifacts and felt its familiar warmth. The symbols seemed to pulse with hidden knowledge, secrets that his ancestors had left for future generations to discover. "There's something else," he said quietly. "The texts suggest that the mental abilities weren't meant to be weapons. They were meant to create understanding between different species, to prevent wars, rather, and win them." 6 months after arriving on Earth, Daniel had helped train 43 people in the ancient mental techniques. It was slow, careful work. Each student required weeks of preparation before they could safely attempt consciousness projection. Many failed completely. Some succeeded only to suffer severe mental strain that left them hospitalized for days. But those who mastered the abilities could do remarkable things. Lieutenant Karan Ross could influence Kithaeron computer systems from orbit. Sergeant Joe Murphy had successfully extracted information from captured enemy officers without them realizing their minds had been read. Corporal Linda Garcia could coordinate with other mental operators across multiple star systems. However, Daniel refused to use the abilities for direct military attacks. Despite pressure from high command, he insisted that the ancient techniques were never meant to destroy or control. They were tools for communication and understanding, not weapons of war. "You're thinking too small," General Adams told him during one of their regular strategy meetings. We could end this war in months if we used these abilities to their full potential. Imagine making every Kithaeron commander surrender simultaneously. And imagine the consequences, Daniel replied. The ancient texts are full of warnings about using mental influence for domination. Civilizations that tried it eventually destroyed themselves. Instead, Daniel proposed a different approach. Rather than attacking Kithaeron military forces directly, they would work to change the social and political conditions that made the war possible. It would take longer, but the results would be permanent and wouldn't require the moral compromises that direct mental control would demand. The plan began with careful research. Using their mental abilities, Daniel's team gathered intelligence on Kithaeron society from the inside. They learned about political factions, economic problems, and social tensions that the war had created. Most importantly, they discovered that many ordinary Kithaerons were tired of the conflict, but felt powerless to change their government's policies. The mental operators began their work quietly. Instead of projecting commands into alien minds, they planted subtle suggestions and ideas. A Kithaeron historian suddenly became interested in ancient texts about peaceful coexistence. A popular artist felt inspired to create works celebrating harmony between different species. A respected military officer began questioning whether the war was really necessary for his people's security. The changes were so gradual that no one suspected outside influence. The ideas felt natural to the Kithaerons who experienced them because Daniel's team was careful to work with existing thoughts and emotions rather than imposing foreign concepts. Dr. Clark provided historical context for their psychological operations. We're not controlling their minds, he explained to skeptical military leaders. We're helping them remember their own capacity for peace. According to their own ancient texts, the Kithaerons were once a peaceful species before the war with the Silent Ones traumatized their entire civilization. The first major breakthrough came when a Kithaeron peace movement began gaining popular support. Professor Zara Keth, a respected academic, published papers arguing that the war with humanity was economically unsustainable and morally questionable. Her ideas spread rapidly through Kithaeron academic circles. Professor Keth didn't know was that her research had been subtly guided by Karen Ross, who had spent weeks carefully influencing the alien scholar's thought patterns. The ideas were genuinely Kithaeron in origin, but they had been encouraged to develop by human mental intervention. Similar movements began appearing throughout Kithaeron space. Religious leaders spoke about the spiritual costs of endless warfare. Economic analysts published studies showing how the military buildup was damaging civilian industries. Even military officers began privately questioning orders that seemed designed more for political purposes than strategic necessity. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Joe Murphy suffered a mental breakdown after spending too long connected to Kithaeron command networks. Linda Garcia lost consciousness for 3 days after attempting to influence an entire Kithaeron colony world simultaneously. Dr. Barnes worked around the clock to develop safety protocols that would protect the operators from the psychological strain, but the results spoke for themselves. Intelligence reports showed growing civil unrest in Kithaeron territory. Public opinion polls indicated declining support for the war effort. Several Kithaeron colonies had begun refusing to send recruits to the military. The turning point came when Grand Admiral Dek Vozel, the supreme commander of Kithaeron military forces, experienced what his people called a philosophical awakening. During a critical strategy meeting, he suddenly began questioning the fundamental assumptions that had driven Kithaeron policy for 15 years. What the admiral didn't realize was that Daniel himself had spent 6 hours projecting consciousness across space to touch the alien leader's mind. Working with extreme care, Daniel had helped the admiral reconnect with memories of his own people's pre-war culture, when they valued wisdom and cooperation over conquest and domination. "The war serves no one," Admiral Vozel announced to his shocked staff. "We have forgotten what we fight for and remember only how to fight. Perhaps it is time to remember who we used to be before fear made us into something else." The Admiral's words were broadcast throughout Kithaeron space and created a sensation. Here was their highest military leader suggesting that the war might be wrong. Within days, similar statements were coming from other influential Kithaerons who had been touched by the human mental operators. General Adams watched the developments with amazement and concern. "You're changing their entire civilization," she told Daniel. "Is that really better than simply defeating them militarily?" "We're not changing them," Daniel insisted. "We're helping them change themselves. The capacity for peace was always there. We're just removing the barriers that prevented them from seeing it." The end came not with a dramatic battle, but with a simple message. Grand Admiral Vozel contacted the human military leadership directly and proposed immediate ceasefire negotiations. He spoke of mutual exhaustion, of the need for both species to focus on building rather than destroying, of ancient bonds between their peoples that predated the current conflict. The peace talks took place on a neutral space station. Daniel attended as part of the human delegation, though his role was kept secret. As he sat across from Kithaeron diplomats, he was amazed to sense genuine desire for peace in their thoughts. The mental influence had awakened something real in their civilization. The treaty that ended the war established cooperative relationships between human and Kithaeron space. Trade agreements replaced military conflicts. Scientific exchanges replaced intelligence operations. Most importantly, both species agreed to study their ancient histories together, searching for the common origins that the recent discoveries had suggested. 2 years after the peace treaty was signed, Daniel stood in the library aboard a new ship called the Harmony. It was jointly operated by human and Kithaeron researchers working to understand their shared past. The ancient stone that had started everything sat on his desk, no longer a mysterious artifact, but a bridge between two civilizations. Peter Collins, now serving as head of Joint Archaeological Research, brought him the day's reports. "We found 17 new sites with the symbols," he said excitedly. "Both species left them everywhere they went. It's like our ancestors were trying to leave us a map back to peace." Daniel smiled as he read through the reports. The weapon that had ended the war wasn't a gun or a bomb or a ship. It was the rediscovery of humanity's oldest gift, the ability to reach across the void and touch another mind with understanding rather than hatred. The ancient texts had been right. The silent voice wasn't about controlling others. It was about remembering that all conscious beings were connected by invisible threads of thought and emotion. The greatest weapons weren't those that destroyed, but those that helped people remember what it meant to be truly alive in an infinite universe full of other minds seeking the same thing. As Daniel filed away the latest archaeological reports, he reflected that perhaps the most important discovery wasn't the mental abilities themselves, but the wisdom to use them for building bridges instead of walls. The war was over, but the real work of building a peaceful galaxy was just beginning.